First of all, I want to welcome everybody to this talk. I'm very excited to be participating and to have Dr. Gloria Willingham-Touré come and speak to us. My name is Josh Good. I'm a professor of history and cultural studies here at Claremont Graduate University. And I want to welcome you all to this discussion. We are an international audience, which is as it should be, given the themes and the focus of this conversation today and the events that are bringing us all together. This event is part of a series of discussions, events designed to commemorate Black History Month, celebrated in the UK in October and in February here in the United States. And I want to thank first Germain Ravelier, who a colleague at Bath Spa University, who is the kind of inspiration for taking his programming around Black History Month in the UK and making it international and reaching out to colleagues around the world to try to inspire a more collective conversation and commemoration. I want to thank the Gala Network, the Global Academy of Liberal Arts, of which Bath Spa University, Claremont Graduate University, and SUNY Geneseo are all founding members. My colleague Cynthia Hawkins is a representative from SUNY Geneseo here on our panel. And I want to note that this electronic day is in a sense an attempt to kind of represent that international quality for this event, and have a sort of more robust international framing of the conversation around Black History Month that's taking place in our two countries, but also really around the world. And so before I introduce our speaker, I do want to just do one small bit of housekeeping for the people in the audience. Our chat function on this webinar is off, but the Q&A tab is available. We will be taking questions. Any questions you have for Dr. Willingham will be, you can present and type into the Q&A. What I would ask and what Dr. Willingham would like is if you could actually just say a little bit, just tell us what your affiliation or where you're emailing from or where your question is coming from, just a little bit about who you are. So, the impersonal nature of the webinar we're trying to counteract as energetically as we can. And it would be nice for Dr. Willingham to know who is asking her the question and to think about where it's coming from. So, I will not do a long introduction for Gloria Willingham-Touré today because it's her story and it's hers to tell. And to go over the series of firsts in her life and her accomplishments would fill up all of our time together. So it's not, it'll take too long. So suffice it to say, as the great-granddaughter of enslaved people, the granddaughter of freed people, and the child of parents who lived in the Jim Crow segregated South. And now, after a long career as a nurse, as a professor, as an administrator, as a Fulbright scholar, knocking down doors, the doors of Little Rock Central High School or the Department of Veterans Affairs, and as almost always the first Black woman serving on or as a head of various boards on which she sits. I want to recognize Dr. Willingham-Touré as a pioneer, as a trailblazer. She now sits as the chair of the board of trustees of Goddard College, is just one example of those many, many doors that she knocks down. She's the current executive director of Afram Global Organization Incorporated and the founder of the Village Projects. Dr. Willingham-Touré's life is a fundamental symbol of the value of the international work we are trying to do today in a very small way. She gathers stories, she puts people together and encourages interaction and communication between people as part of her life's work and her legacy. And I have to say personally, when I first heard Dr. Willingham speak a few years ago, I remember it. And in particular, I remember her ongoing injunction, which sort of is is part of the tapestry of her life's work, her injunction to always lift as one climbs. which, you know, I think is fairly understandable. But what really struck me about that, and why it's always stayed with me, and especially for our conversations today, is, you know, remembering that one story is always the story of the connections to the past. The ladder reaches down to the past, and the requirement to think about the future and to help those who will come after you. And I can think of no better sensibility for commemorating and thinking about Black History Month in any location. So with that, Dr. Willingham, I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated, Josh. I'm happy to be here today. So let me start out by saying to all of you, wherever you are in the world, okay, I'm really happy that you're here. And I realize that we're all in different time zones, and we're making this real time in all these different time zones. I'm very mindful of that. I want to say a special good evenings to all of our colleagues that are a part of the whole Global Academy of Liberal Arts. I've learned a lot about you in the last few weeks for sure. And I was told that it was 25 member colleges and universities around the world who actually are a part of this organization. And I was really happy to hear that. And I'm really happy to be able to come to you now during this Black History Month in the UK, because I think that Black history is not limited to one place. You know, those of us in the United States sort of think we own it, and that's it, when that's not the beginning of our history, nor is it the beginning of the history of Blacks anywhere in the world. So I'm going to sort of take it from there if I can. Now, today's technology, as you know, provides us with an opportunity to address large audiences around the world and in real time, and that's sort of what we're doing today. However, with that reality, I like to sort of be clear about who I'm talking to. So it's my understanding that we're talking to their students, scholars, faculty members, community members who have been invited by members of the Gala organization. I'm going to assume that that's who you are. But I want you to know that there's another group that's here today that you may not know. Now, I've learned that whenever I'm speaking somewhere, we always have to take my cheering squad with me. So I do have a cheering squad out there. It's really important. And those people are people, hello, all of you, some from the Villager Awards back in the USA, from my family, my friends, my church, my neighbors, my former students, students from all over the world that I've been privileged to serve on your dissertation committees, and any of you that have joined, I want you to know I'm really happy to be here, because those people, you are the people that I refer to as being the witnesses to my life. I can tell you my story. I can tell you where I've been and what I've seen and what I think. But you're the people who can attest to the credibility of what I'm saying. This will not be the first time that many of you will have heard this story or similar stories. So to me, those persons who are the witnesses to our lives are very, very important people. Because in the context of Black history, particularly, quite often it is the witnesses to our lives that never get heard either. And so we have a hard time getting credibility because we miss those witnesses. So witnesses, you are very important to me. So thank you very much for being here. For some of you here, this may be the first time that you've heard a Black woman telling stories from her life. I know that might be true. I get that. That's okay. But I hope you will listen, and I hope you will learn. I hope you will have questions that as the days and weeks and months and years go by, that you will search for answers. I will not have all the answers for you. I can tell you that now. But what I will do is that I hope I will give you enough story here that you will search for answers. That's what we really want you to do. And that's an ongoing thing, whether it's Black History Month or not. Uh, because another reason why. I hope that you will leave here with a desire to learn more about Black history as you experienced it. Because whether you're Black or not, you are experiencing Black history every single day. And I hope I'll be able to bring all of you, as diverse as you are and wherever you are, into my world as a part of your world. Because whether we know it or not, we live in parallel universes, because all our histories are occurring at the same time in real time. And I personally feel that it's time now to pull those histories together and to be able to see the interconnections. So I'm going to start. Here in the United States, there was a murder. a killing that occurred in real time. And that was the killing of George Floyd. That killing occurred over almost a 9-minute time frame here in the United States. And let me tell you, when it occurred, my heart and my soul cried at a depth that I could not explain then, and I cannot fully explain now. I knew from the very first frame of that news video that this man, who was still nameless to me at the time, was not, quote, the first Black man who had experienced this atrocity. I knew that he was not the only Black man that had experienced this atrocity. And I knew that he was not one of a few Black men who had experienced this atrocity. The tears just seemed to permeate everything that was a part of my entire being. It felt as if I was reaching back through generations in my own family and in the family of countless others. I recall the slavery time stories that were passed down through generations of my family, where the time of slavery in the United States was still close. See, we're not that far removed in my family from that time. We can still touch people who can touch people who can touch people who were there. So we're not that far removed. I recall the story of lynching that occurred in my own family. I recall the stories of the Emancipation Proclamation passed down to me, not through books that I had read, but through members of my own family. I recall the stories of life after the emancipation, through Reconstruction, through the Jim Crow laws, through the Civil Rights era to today. And those painful recollections span just 3 generations in my family. Now here I was at the 4th generation, and this Black man was being killed in real time. Here I was listening as he cried out for his deceased mother, the generation before him, as he cried out, "Mama." Many things ran through my mind. I thought, if George Floyd had been a white man, would this have happened? I was almost afraid to think that. I didn't want to think that, but it came into my mind and I couldn't knock it out of it. I thought, oh my God, it has come to this. I thought this could have been one of my sons. I thought, if this can occur in this country, is any Black person really safe? I thought, what happened? And I told myself that everything was all right, that things were different now. But Gloria, you shouldn't be thinking any of these things. And yet in the back of my mind, I knew better. I knew that things were not all right. And I began to wonder, who else knows that things are not all right? Is this just me? I began to wonder, who cares? Who cares? Does my life matter? Does anybody really care? Is this a nightmare and will I wake up and everything will be all right? I just couldn't let it go. Back in the 1990s, when I was a graduate student at Claremont, one of my professors, who ultimately became the chair of my dissertation committee, was Dr. John Reagan. And his area of expertise was beyond a doubt that of nonverbal communication, the study of what was being communicated through actions without words. And my mind ran backwards to the many academic discussions that we had in that realm. My mind ran backwards to all the research presentations and the analysis. I recalled how I felt as a student when I would struggle trying to explain things that I had personally witnessed in my own life, or things that my parents or my grandparents and other elders in my family had taught me, things that often brought with it messages beyond words. And I remember questioning my own realities because in many ways they seemed so different than what I came to refer to as the quote unquote sanitized research studies that were before me. Now, I often refer to much of the research that was before me in graduate school as being quote unquote sanitized because the vast majority of it was excluded the parallel lives of Black people. And that included Black scholars. They were excluded. I felt as if I was constantly the yes, but person, the person who was always trying to explain first to myself and then to my audience that there was a parallel universe occurring that we may have been seeing and experiencing the world differently, but we were all seeing and experiencing the world at the same time. There'd be times when I was so tired of always being the only person bringing that reality into the conversation, while at the same time understanding that if I didn't bring it forward, it would never enter the conversation. I would be forced to always be the receiver of knowledge, as opposed to being the contributor of knowledge through my lens. Now, Dr. Reagan not only sensed my struggle, as he undoubtedly watched my nonverbal behavior in his seminars, he sensed that there was something deep inside of me that had been excluded from my studies for too long. There was something deep inside of me that was of value in the historical context of my existence. And then one day, he asked me a very important question. He asked, Gloria, how many times do you have to see something before you know it's true? He said, how many times do you have to see something before you know it's true? That simple question was hovering in the back of my mind as I watched the video of the real-time killing of George Floyd under the weaponized knee of a seemingly unrepentant policeman. I knew exactly what I was seeing, and I found myself questioning the reality of it all. And there was that voice, Gloria, how many times do you have to see something before you know it is true? And so my mind came back to what I knew was true, not only at that moment, but through the history of the lives of Blacks as people in this country for so long. Where do I go from here? Jumped into my head. How do I process all of this? And then it happened just when I needed it to happen, just when I was searching for some piece of sanity to help me understand all of this. It happened. People took to the streets all across the United States, then all over the world. The refrain, Black Lives Matter, became a phrase of comfort to my spirit. I thought to myself, this is real. This is real. I have seen it through generations. I hope that maybe somebody would care one day, and now I'm hearing that refrain, Black Lives Matter. My heart was saying aloud, somebody please care. Please stop pretending that you do not know that Blacks have experienced so many institutionalized atrocities as a race in this country. Those atrocities have been in many cases in full view, and yet their existence has been denied. And so when I heard that chant, Black Lives Matter, I felt everything starting to rise to the surface and bringing me a whole new degree of comfort that I had not felt before. I no longer felt alone. And I recalled again the question that Dr. Reagan had asked me when he said, how many times do you have to see something before you know it is true? He said, how many times do you have to search for information before it becomes true? Those questions loomed heavy in my mind as tears continued to roll down my cheeks. But this time, I found my tears being accompanied by the unrelenting question, does anybody care? Does anybody care? It became apparent to me that the term quote unquote Black, and particularly when the term Black is racialized and it's used not to mean a color Black, or when it's purely referring to the race of Black, Even in the aftermath of the tragic killing of this man, the word Black was still not accepted by many persons when that word was used in combination with the phrase, lives matter. And I noticed that other words were slowly being substituted for the word Black. There was a substitution of the words such as all. Nobody seemed to have a lot of problems with that. And then there was the word blue. And then there were other words. Now, to me, that signaled to me that there was a need to bring persons into my world as a Black person to see what I see here in the United States. That internal battle grew in intensity at that point. And parallel to that internal battle was trying to make sense of all of this within a historical context that had existed unexposed too long. Oh, but the protests continued to rise all over the United States and all over the world. These were different than protests that I had witnessed in the past. These were informed protests. These were heartfelt protests. These were protests with a desire for real change. These were protests informed by acknowledgement of a history that had been hidden beneath the surface for too long. And the uncovering of each layer brought and will continue to bring the demand for change. Protests became a new generation of a worldwide movement to bring the lives of Black people to the forefront of reality around the globe, not beneath the surface, but to the forefront. For the first time in my life, I began to feel that maybe somebody cares. Maybe somebody feels the need for a Black future that is filled with a clearer understanding of why Black lives matter. I began to see this movement not as a passing event, but rather as a catalyst for the dawning of a new era. An era that would require change beyond what had occurred previously, an era that would take us beyond the history of our past, drawing from that, but into our future. In order to understand that reality, I place it in the context of my own personal life experience during a preceding movement titled by many as the Civil Rights era of the 1960s, one that was considered equally contentious, but similar to the previous eras. It was a stepping stone to where we are now. Each stone bringing us closer to a new reality in the middle of an undeniable reality of the past. So against that backdrop now, I want you to sort of sit back for a minute. I want you to relax. And I want you to travel with me just quickly on a journey through my lifetime. You can't get through all of it. We don't have time for all of it. But we're going to get through the parts I think that will get you to where I am now. All right. I was recently featured as a co-author in a new anthology entitled Black Women Speak by Giselle Shapiro, and I'm sure she's listening in on this, no doubt about that. Giselle had this bright idea of pulling together a bunch of Black people and having us just all tell our stories. Just tell it any way you want to tell it. So that's sort of where we are right now. So my story begins. I grew up spending 9 months each year in a town, a city in the United States named Little Rock, in a state called Arkansas. That's where I was born. And I would spend 3 months every summer in Holly Grove, Arkansas with my maternal grandparents. Holly Grove, Arkansas was very different than Little Rock. It was a rural town. Little Rock was considered the quote unquote city. But my parents believed that it was important for us to know how to live in the city and how to live in the rural areas. They believed that it was important for us because they felt that once we got to the city, that we would be forced to live and to know and to understand what they call the white world. And if we walked into that world without ever knowing the culture that we were leaving behind, that we would somehow discount that. And so we had to live both lives. Now, Little Rock, Arkansas at the time was considered a very progressive Southern city. Well, according to some publication. If you read the published history, you would find it described as a quote unquote progressive city In many ways, we may have bought into that rhetoric, too often comparing it to rural areas, which were thought to be less than progressive. Little Rock at the time of my childhood was deliberately racially segregated, deliberately, although it is written, for you historians out there, that there were no laws that actually prohibited Blacks and whites from living in the same area. There were no laws that said that. That's why Little Rock was considered so progressive, because what Little Rock did, they did without having laws to force them to do it. So there was a study that came along in 1941, before I was even born, that said that white Negroes, which is what we were called at the time, were predominant in certain sections of Little Rock, that there was really no widespread Negro sections. That's what they said, that didn't exist. That's what that study said, okay? And then history tells us that by 1949 in Little Rock, Arkansas, there was a move to build Black public housing, and to build that public housing as far on the farthest edges of the city, as far away from white neighborhoods as you can get. That's where that was built, and that's where that housing was. And then there was a move that went along with that, and the move was to force more affluent Blacks who happened to live a little bit, further into the city there, to sell their property and to move out of there, because the goal was to get all of us in this one area. And that's referred to as residential gerrymandering. For you students that are out there, look it up, residential gerrymandering. When Brown versus the Board of Education ruling came about years later, in the 1950s actually, it mandated the desegregation of schools. And the first response from Little Rock, Arkansas, was to build 2 racially segregated schools. Now, that sounded pretty good at the time. It really did, because you had white Central High School, which already existed, and it was sort of located in the central area of Little Rock. And you had Black Dunbar High School, which really existed further. It was on the west side, but it was further east and closer to where most of the Black population lived. So when you first hear that, you say, oh, well, that sounds pretty good. Dunbar has a very good reputation, very good school. But the next move, if they did that, once Brown versus the Board of Education passed, was to build 2 new schools in Little Rock, Arkansas. And the new schools were Harshman High School, which was built in the predominantly Black east side of Little Rock, and Hall High School, which was built in the predominantly affluent white side of West Little Rock. Now, this is said that what happened with this was that this really was very sort of underneath it all, allowing the growth in a very segregated manner, consistent with the city's housing policy. You want to live in a good area that's got good schools. Well, you had Hall High School, it's a wonderful school over here. They say it's got all the amenities, everything that you could ever want to have here. And so white people were really sort of pushed in to the west side of town, and Black people were really pushed further east. Covenants were placed on housing contracts to prevent them from being resold to Blacks. If you lived in a white area, and if a Black person wanted to buy a house in that area, what would happen quite often, usually be some of our Jewish brothers and sisters who would buy the house, and then they would resell it to the Black person. Well, they put covenants in to stop that from happening. And so that sort of slowed that down a little bit. They didn't want it. They didn't want it that way. Blacks couldn't buy into white areas. Now, was it that they say, well, we're not legally keeping them out? No, no, no. Yeah, that's what was said. But in reality, the system was in place. It was in place. And then redlining came along later, and this was used by banks and mortgage brokers to deny loans to Black families in residential areas that had been quote unquote reserved for whites. And to make it work, real estate agents steered whites into white areas and steered Blacks into Black areas. Now, I personally experienced that the first time I decided to buy a house by myself, and it was in a white area. I still remember that very well, because I remember I was fortunate. I had a very good real estate agent who knew what was going on, and she was tired of it, to be perfectly honest. She was truly a white ally. And I remember she came to me when the bank turned down my loan, and I couldn't understand why. And she said, there's only one reason why, and I know what it is. And if you will bear with me on this, I will fight this battle with you. She said, it's because you're Black. There's no other reason for it. Your income is fine. Your credit is fine. You have everything that you need to buy this house. And she said, what she wants to do was to approach the bank about this. And I want to approach it openly. Are you with me? And I said, yes. And that's exactly what happened. And that's how I ended up getting into that house. Now, as a child, though, I had no idea that all of this was going on. Most children don't really know what's going on. I didn't know. It would take me decades to see the systems and structures that were disenfranchising Blacks. So back to my family. Okay. So my family lived in East Little Rock until I was 9 years old. We were surrounded by aunts, uncles, cousins, close family friends, neighbors, most of whom had migrated from the rural areas of Arkansas in search of job opportunities. And many of them were from families that owned land and had been sustained by farming during the decades following Reconstruction. Many, like my father, had known family members who had been previously enslaved, but had somehow amassed property and independence. Many, like my father, had experienced or knew of dangerous situations in their hometowns in which Blacks had been killed or severely injured by whites with no repercussions inflicted on the whites. So they had no trust whatsoever in that legal system. It's no wonder that they were seeking a better life. And East Little Rock had lumber mills, cottonseed oil plants, factories, and many, many other job opportunities. Unemployment among Blacks was rare in that neighborhood. It was the men who were the breadwinners, and most of the women either stayed home as housewives, raising the children, or those who did work, worked outside the home, and they were housekeepers for white families on the other side of town, which was an area known as Pulaski Heights, or they worked in the mattress factories or in laundries. Now, the only white person I ever saw during those years in my neighborhood was the owner of the neighborhood grocery stores and a white lady who lived next door to us. Now, she would often be seen outside in her yard talking to herself. She never really had much to say to any of us. I never saw any visitors at her house. And we assumed that she had some kind of mental condition simply because of the way we saw her acting, and that she probably had been virtually disowned by her family. That was sort of what we thought. There was one Black public health nurse who visited all the families routinely to make sure that all the children had their immunizations and that the pregnant women were doing well. It was a happy time in my life. It was a truly happy time. That was my life until I was 9 years old. I was completely isolated from the so-called white world and barely knew that it existed, except when my mother would take us downtown and she would hold our hands tightly. And oh my gosh, so she has so many rules for us to follow. She'd say, stand to the side so other people can pass by you without touching you. Or she would say, no running, walk, don't run. Or she would say, always say yes, sir, and yes, ma'am. Or stay close to me and hold my hand. Don't let my hand go, you hold my hand. Or she would say, eat and use the bathroom before you leave home. And don't be asking for something to eat while you're downtown. I never questioned those rules. They simply seem to be a way of life. And then we moved to West Little Rock when I was 9 years old. My brother Charles was 6. It was a strange and a different place for me. There were more white people living on the west side. And although I wouldn't really call them neighbors, they lived in closer proximity to me. There would be Black people living on one side of the street and white people living on the other side. There was a clear line of demarcation, unquestioned. My brother Charles and I quickly made new friends. Our friends were all Black because there was no mixing with the white kids across the street. Now, we continued to attend all Black schools while the white kids attended their all white schools. My father had acquired a job as a maintenance worker at Blast Department Store in downtown Little Rock, and life seemed good. And then the order to desegregate schools in Little Rock, Arkansas came down after Brown versus the Board of Education. I was still in junior high school at the time, and I really didn't know a lot. I would learn about Brown versus the Board of Education decades later. I never knew about it during those years. I learned about that later after I'd grown up and gone to college and studied it. But what I did know was that in 1957, there were 9 colored students at Little Rock Central High School, and that President Eisenhower had sent the National Guard there. I didn't even know why. I just knew they were there. I knew that the governor of Arkansas, Orville Faubus was his name at the time, was a staunch segregationist. And as was true of most of the persons in powerful positions at that time, I learned that from listening to my parents talking with other adults. Now, let me tell you something. At that time, I lived on 8th and Park, and Little Rock Central High School was on 14th and Park. I just want to tell you how these lines of demarcation go. And how close that is. That's barely 6 blocks away from me. I'd never seen it before until I saw it on the news. Never dawned on me that I would even be going there. Didn't know. But then I was approached by my homeroom teacher, Mr. Roland Smith, at the all-Black Dunbar Junior High School. And he told me that they were preparing to send another group of colored students into Central High School, and that he wanted to recommend me to be one of them. Now, at the time, I was a member of the Junior National Honor Society, the student council, the band. I was an editor of the school newspaper, but I was very quiet and very serious for my age. Well, he told me that as a first step, I needed to get my parents' permission. And he gave me a permission slip to take home with me to get the signature. Well, I knew immediately that they would never sign anything to place me into what was considered obviously a very dangerous situation. I mean, I'd heard enough about it to know that. And yet I knew that deep down inside of me, it was something that I wanted to do. Not only did I feel it was something that I wanted to do, it was as if I felt it was a part of my destiny, like it was something that I was supposed to do. At least that's what I told myself as I walked home from school, tried to figure out how I was going to make these two things work. How I was going to get my parents' permission on one side, and then how I was going to get selected to go to Central High School on the other. But by the time I got home, I was quite certain that my daddy was not going to sign off on anything. There's no way. I'd heard him say it. I wouldn't send my child into that. No, I'm just not going to do it. So I thought, well, there's only one way to make this happen. I signed my father's name to that permission slip. Yep, that's what I did. And looking back, when I look back over it, I asked myself, you know, children really have strange ways of seeing the world. How in the world did I ever think that that was going to remain a secret? I'm signing the permission slip. I'm taking it back. I mean, this was not something you could hide. But in my head, I thought that was going to be it. I signed that little permission slip, and the next day I took that slip back proudly to school, and I gave it to my teacher. He was so happy that I had agreed to this. And then the process started. It was a strange process for me. Number one, it wasn't something that I was allowed to talk about. You know, he took it was like little secrets that were going around at our junior high school for those of us who were going to be going. I don't think any of us really talked about it, and nobody talked about it out loud. We just knew that there was a group of us that were sort of getting ready for this. And there was a series of tests that we took. I remember those tests because later on, years later, if anybody wants to read my dissertation, you hear me talk about that. I have this thing about tests to this very day. Because I wonder, why are we taking all of these tests? I know good and well that not everybody that goes to Little Rock Central High School is having to take all of these tests. So I already knew there was some reason behind all of that. But I didn't know, and I didn't really care at that time. But I thought, well, maybe they're trying to determine if I was smart enough to attend school with whites, because there was still that whole thing that, you know, maybe they can't make it. But whatever it was, I guess I passed because I ended up being one of the ones that was selected. This is when it got a little strange. The day came when the announcement of the colored students, the next group of colored students who had now been selected to desegregate schools in Little Rock, Arkansas, right there in the newspaper. And not only did they have our names right there in the newspaper, they had the names of our parents, what they did, and where they worked. So, needless to say, my father picked up that newspaper, and there's when he found out. That was when my parents found out that I was going to be going to Little Rock Central High School. I was scared to death. I didn't know what to say. I just didn't know what to say. My dad just said, well, girl, tell me about this. That's all he said. Just tell me about it. And I just said, well, I don't know anything yet, Daddy. I won't know anything until I get there. That was all I could say. And that was really the truth. I mean, it was the truth. But the next day, my father lost his job. He went back to work the next day. He was fired. He was fired because his daughter was one of the kids who had been selected to go to this white school. And I would later learn that he was not the only one that was fired, that many of us lost, our parents lost their jobs behind that. But once he lost his job, he really, at that point, was very behind me 100%, because he knew exactly what was going on at that point. It's like, you can't force me out. You can't scare us out. At that time, my grandfather was still alive. My grandfathers had been raised by a father who had just come out of slavery. And so he became really strong. Everybody in my family did at that point. It was like, no, no, we're behind you 100%. They received death threats. They received all kinds of hate mail. Looking back on it, I wish that I had saved some of the hate mail. I didn't save it. Instead, I would try to run home and tear it up because I didn't want them to see what was really going on. But they did. They had to live through all of that. And I know it was probably much harder for them than I ever really imagined. I just know it was. We moved. After a while, after Dad lost his job, he did everything he could do to try to find work. He and my Uncle William got together and they did everything from cutting grass to doing repair works on whatever they could do until they finally, were able to make it. And then finally, there was a gentleman who had a house who was very sick and needed somebody to take care of him. And so in exchange for rent, we moved in with him. And my mother took care of him every day. And my father went to work. The man who owned the store in the neighborhood where we lived knew somebody at the Little Rock Housing Authority, and he arranged to get a job for my father. And my father worked at the Little Rock Housing Authority until he retired. We were then able to move into a nicer place up closer to Little Rock Central High School than where we were. And we moved there. And I started Little Rock Central High School. Now I'm just going to tell you just a little bit about that. I remember my first day more than any other day, I think, because I don't know what I thought. I had no idea what I was really getting into. And Reverend Henderson would take us all to school, and he parked on the side, near the side door there at Little Rock Central High School. And being the great minister that he was, he prayed for us like, oh, if prayer would cover us, we were covered in prayer. I mean, he prayed long, hard prayer. So while he was praying, I can remember all of us were sort of looking out the window, trying to figure out how we were going to get into this school undetected, basically. And we did. We ran out of that car as soon as he said, amen. We were running out of that car. I ran through that side door because I didn't know where I was going. I'm going into a strange school. I knew it was going to be a hostile environment. I didn't know where my homeroom class was. I had to maneuver my way through. And I ran as fast as I could. And I ran up those stairs as fast as I could run. And there it was right on the corner, my homeroom. So I thought the prayer works. So I ran into that room, I sat down, and that was the beginning of my life at Little Rock Central High School. That was the beginning of what we often refer to as our 3 years in hell. We often called it that because it really was not what I thought it was going to be. There were things that I learned when I got there. I learned, number one, where to sit in a classroom, to always make sure that I sat in what I call a safe place. And safe place to me was up fairly close to the teacher. And it was a place where when the bell rang, that I could run out of that classroom quickly and be the first one out of there so that I wouldn't have to deal with the crowd coming out of the classroom. I learned how to walk down the hallways away from the windows so that people couldn't, if they threw ink out of the windows, that it wouldn't reach me because I'd be on the other side. I learned how to walk almost semi-tippy-toe on my toes so that if somebody stepped on the back of my shoes, my foot would come down before it would make my shoe come off and trip me. I learned who were the people to be afraid of. I learned which ones were just going to stand there, but they really weren't a danger to me. I learned that when I went to the bathroom, how to wait until the bathroom was empty before I came out of there. I mean, these were things that as a high school student, you're having to learn. I had to learn all of those things. We were not allowed to participate in any extracurricular activities at all, none. We were only allowed to be there. Now, as I told you, that was very different for us. We'd been very popular kids before we got there. We just were not allowed to. We couldn't go to anything. No dances, no football games, no basketball games, no nothing. You were just there. The only time that we were together was when we were in the cafeteria. And that was a dangerous place too, because when the young boys would throw rocks through the windows at us or through the doors. There was the double door and they would throw the rocks in there. So there was no safe place for us anywhere at Little Rock Central High School. That was my 3 years at Central High School. That was it. I had to learn on my own. My teachers didn't teach me anything because they didn't talk to us at all. So I learned how to be a real independent learner at that point. I had no choice except to do that. And so to skip past those days, to tell you, I did graduate. We all graduated. We had no choice except to graduate. And we knew that we represented not ourselves, but our entire race. We learned what racism really meant when we were there. And what it meant to us was that it didn't matter who we were. It didn't matter who I was. You could have taken me out of that environment and put any other Black child in that environment. It would have been the same thing because it was not me, Gloria, that was under attack. No, no, no. It was me, my Blackness, that was under attack. And I think we see a lot of that even now when we really start looking at who we are as Black people and how that fits into our history. And so when I left Little Rock Central High School, one of the things I decided was that I would never, as long as I live, I said, I have done my part. I have did my sacrifice. I have been down for the cause. I'm not going to have anything to do with anything that has to do with civil rights or anything else from now to the day I die. That's what I decided. I'm going to college. I'm going to have a good time. I'm not going to do anything. That was my plan because my naivety told me that once we did that, everything was all right. It told me that everything was all right. Now you can go to college, you can get an education, you can get a degree, you can get a good job, you can do all the things that we were told that was going to make everything all right. And then I found out everything was not all right. And then again, I found myself thinking of what Dr. Reagan had asked me. How many times do you have to see something before you know it's true? Only this time I wasn't looking for it. It was just jumping out at me. But now I had another question. And that question was, how many times do you have to see something to know that it is not true? Is everything all right? Have things really changed? And I moved that conversation across generations in my family to my cousins who also attended Little Rock Central High School. The most recent one just graduated a year ago. They walked safely down the hallways. They participated in extracurricular activities. They experienced very little bullying or hate speech or threats. But the remnants of the system that led to my experiences still exists. The racial segregation, the ignoring of Black students in the classroom by white teachers. Only this time because those teachers did not have the knowledge of the Black students' culture. And so they didn't know how to be interactive. They had grown up in the systems that excluded Black lives from their education systems. And so this is where I come to you now as I come to a close. You, the scholars, you, the teachers, you, the students, you are the gatekeepers of knowledge. It is you who get to decide what is considered credible knowledge. It is you who open the doors to more inclusive learning or who also have the power to close those doors. You have power. You live parallel lives with your students, and you must come to know those parallels. You can no longer hide behind what you've always known to be true without opening the doors for new truths to emerge. Perhaps it is time for you to become the first, the only, or one of a few. This change in opening the doors to historical accounts rests in your hands. History is in your hands. You can no longer stand by while the breath of life is crushed from persons simply because they're Black. It's time for you to step back and tell yourselves, Black lives matter. Now is your time. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Gloria. You can hear the round of applause. You can hear the chanting. This is the difficulties of our world right now. But thank you for that. So what we're going to do now is open the floor to questions. For those of you new to the webinar format, you'll see a tab at the bottom that says Q&A. Feel free to send in any question you have. And what will happen is I will present it to Gloria. What I would ask again though is it would be helpful for Gloria to know just a little bit of where you're emailing from, or what your affiliation is, or what your position is at whatever your affiliation is. So do let me know. So at the moment, no questions have come in yet. I know Jermaine has a question, so Jermaine, inspire all of us.
Yes.
I don't think I'm the one that's inspiring anybody at the moment after listening to Gloria just then. So Gloria, thank you so much. I had to bring my daughter in because we've read a lot about Ruby Bridges just a couple of years before you. I've been reading to her about Black history in the States and in the UK for years. So in the 50s, my grandparents moved here to the UK from Dominica, and they experienced racism that I can only imagine. So in the windows of houses and shops, there were signs saying no blacks, no dogs, no Irish. And my granddad especially told me about how he was beaten up by the police and, those kind of things. And that's really affected the way that they raised us. So for any kind of Black or mixed race person in the talk in the UK, in this talk, you'd have been given the talk by your parents, your grandparents. So, stay out of trouble, stay away from the police, work harder than those that you're better than just to get the same distance as them. So this has all affected the way that we were brought up and how we were raised. So how have your experiences affected how you experience life?
And thank you for saying that, Jermaine, because now you bring not only to the global aspect, but the generational aspects, because you're absolutely right. That's exactly what has happened, I think, with me. There's a set of rules, so to speak, that I had to be mindful of to help me to maneuver my way through that world once I stepped outside of my house. And the one that you mentioned about, I'm going to talk about, we were taught you always had to work twice as hard to get half as far. And I've been surprised at how much that resonates around the globe. But I was definitely taught that I was going to have to be not just qualified for something that was coming up, but that I had to be better, And I resisted that at first because I thought, oh, no, that's not really true. But life has taught me that it is true. And then what life also taught me with that was not only that it was true, but that I have normalized it. And so as other people have normalized it, almost to the point where it becomes an expectation, and we accept that. And I don't think we should. I think, the fight is on the other side of that now. But I do find that happening. I was prepared for that. I think they taught me a lot of things. I have sons of my own. I have taught them the same. It's a struggle. It is a struggle to teach my children, because you know what? I don't want to ever have to teach them to watch out for some of the things that my parents taught me. I don't want to do that. I want to think that it's not necessary and then something happens. Something happens and I know that it is necessary. I had a situation with my two sons when we were living in Louisiana, and they were merely walking home through a white neighborhood on their way from the shopping center. They were kids. They were like 9, 10. I had told them, I said, listen, you need to be home before the sun goes down. That's what I told them. And they decided they were having fun with their friends, and they didn't do that. They came home after the sun went down. And what happened was that this white man literally shot at them. I couldn't believe it had happened. They ran home. They were scared to death. I called the police to report it. It took hours for the police to even show up at my house. And then they just said, well, that kind of thing happens. And that was it. So then I knew I needed to talk to them more, and I didn't want to. I didn't want to have that conversation. But yes, in response to you.
All righty. Well, we have some questions that have come in. I'm going to, well, a couple questions have come in, a couple of just uh, expressions of deep appreciation and sort of deeply felt reactions to your story and the sacrifices. One from Leslie White here at the Drucker School of Management. Thank you, Gloria, for all you have led and sacrificed. This was an enormous gift. Another from, and I apologize for if I'm not getting the pronunciation of names correctly, Eva Hniezdo, who's a retired medical doctor and a writer from Prague. She lives in London, where she obtained political asylum in the UK in 1986. She's Jewish, and she writes just how powerful that your presentation was, how the question of how many times can you see something before you know it's true will stay with her. She does want to know if you've written about your experiences, if there's a book, can she get it? If you haven't, you should. So that's one quick question. And then sort of connected to that, Claire Tai Lee, who is a librarian at the University of Bath in the UK, wants to know specifically, what do you think libraries can do to help? How would you think libraries can help? And then more questions are coming in. Why don't we start with those, and I'll start organizing the other questions.
Okay, let me answer two of them. Let me start with somebody that asked about, had I written a book? I have a real story. That's another whole speech of its own. I started writing, keeping a journal from the time I was in Central High School, true story, all the way through to now. So I think in my garage, I probably have more unpublished papers than anybody you can think of. That's why I can pull it out in a minute. But I'm happy to tell you that I am working on it, and that will be coming out. Now, ahead of that book, though, I have to refer you to California State University Fullerton, who did a study a few years ago on women in politics and activism. And they jumped ahead of me and actually interviewed me and actually wrote my story. So that's from them. But I'm writing one on my own, so that you'll get to see that in the very near future. I hopefully be done by the end of the year. And I did just complete writing a chapter in Black Women Speak, which also talks a lot to that. And it also has a challenge that comes with that. So I wanted to throw that part out. Now, the second question was,
This
Josh.
question, yeah, no, I'm managing and turning off the mute. The other question was from a librarian who was asking, Claire Tiley was asking specifically, how can libraries help, and what role do you, what would you imagine a library can do to commemorate and maintain these stories?
You know, one thing I've noticed about libraries, and I've noticed the same thing in schools as well, when it's Black History Month, you know, schools and libraries can really come up with some good stuff. They really can, and I've seen it. You know, I've seen all kinds of exhibits and displays and things. So we know if we run in and get it in during that little window of Black History Month, we can probably pick up quite a bit of stuff. I like to see that become routine, though, not just during Black History Month. You know, I'd like to see those kinds of displays. I'd like to see those kinds of presentations. A lot of libraries I know here in the States, a lot of libraries have conferences and they have learning sessions. They have conversations on certain things. And I'd like to see librarians really become more involved in that. I am so impressed with libraries and librarians and with the power that you have. I talk a lot about the power that our scholars and professors have, but I think librarians, you are also one of the gatekeepers of knowledge. You really are. Because when you speak, other people do listen. So yes, I think that you just need to be just as good as you are during Black History Month. I'd like to see it all the time.
Okie dokie. So one specific question actually from Linda Richardson, who is the founder of a youth program in Philadelphia.
Hi, Linda. I know Linda, yes.
Oh, okay. She just wanted to know, and I think she must be referring to Little Rock Central High School. Did you have other Black students in your class? How many? And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, you know what? I just got through interviewing Sandra Johnson, who was one of the students. She was a year ahead of me. at Little Rock Central High School, one of the Black students, and we talked about that. We were really separated from each other. We just started talking about that now as we become older people, about what difference would it have made if we had been together in the classroom. I don't know. But we were basically, I think I had one class where I had other Black students in the classroom with me. But for the most part, we were one, 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 one. We were not together. We didn't spend a lot of time together socially. I think on news reports, it makes it sound like we just all hung out together and we were like best friends all the time. That wasn't really true. You know, there were three of us that we sort of knew each other because we'd grown up together, but the rest of us, we didn't really know each other that well. Uh, there were a number of events where we were allowed to come together and talk about our experiences, but as far as in the classrooms, no.
So there are a number of just expressions of deep appreciation and just the how emotionally moving your talk was. And just for everyone who's still who's around, know that I am saving the questions. Your name is included in those questions. Gloria will have them, and you know, so that know that your expressions are being received and heard. I want to you know, focus on some of the specific questions. Maria Morales has asked, first, thank you for sharing your story, Gloria. As I listened to you talk about the psychological repercussions of being an outsider at school, I couldn't help but remember my own experiences as an immigrant child of color in the US, experiences that marked my life more profoundly than I'll ever know. And her question, do you feel there's more we can do to address the mental health issues faced by minority students? And, you know, and I think that's actually, I mean, what are the lasting repercussions of that kind of experience?
And hi, Maria. Yes, I do know Dr. Morales as well. In fact, we have been talking about it. We talked about this whole issue of number one, what's considered psychological problems or mental problems, and what is really, let's see, Maria, how do I talk about this now? What we talked about really had to do with the fact that how much of what is happening to us is something that really could be rectified before it ran to the realm of being a psychological issue. For instance, I talk about when I was a student at Little Rock Central High School, we talk about bullying now. Let me tell you, I can talk about bullying way past what you're talking about now. And we're not just talking about bullying by students, by kids. We're talking about bullying by full-grown adults as well. And I said, so when we talk about that, I said, so I don't know. You see, you could have brought all the counselors in the world for me. You could have brought them all right there in the Little Rock Central High School, and you could have put them there to see me every day and have me go in and just talk about that. That never would have changed a thing. It wouldn't have. In fact, you would have placed me in a position to think that what was happening was something wrong with me as opposed to the situation. And I really think that that's something that we see now quite often with our children. That's another whole speech. We see that quite often with our children, who are often the ones who are seen as being the ones in need of deep psychological counseling without ever really looking at the situations that they're having to maneuver their ways through every single day. We see it with our adults. It's a whole different piece. And quite often I'll hear people talk about Black people and how Black people don't go for counseling and how we need it. And I said, because I think it's more than that. I think it's more than that. I think there are situations that we're in, and until those situations are rectified, we can't make it go away by saying that it's just in your head. Because it's in our head, all right, but it's in our head for a reason.
Okay, thank you. So a couple, about three other questions that are sort of linked thematically, but I can ask them separately. One from Doug Wells, who is a music graduate from Basketball University, who specifically wants to know, how do we maintain the Black History Month conversation all year round? And I know Jermaine's listening and I'm listening, and we're all listening to that answer.
And I'm gonna punt that question right back out there to Jermaine and to Josh and Cynthia, away from me for a minute, because I always say those are questions that you need to address there.
Well, Jermaine, you unmuted, so.
Yeah, no, I'm just reflecting on what's happened very recently in our parliament, actually. And, you know, there have been calls for decolonization and to teach Black history more widely. But our government, which is very much in power at the moment and has a huge majority, have kind of just said there's nothing wrong with history as it's taught at the moment, despite the issues with, you know, the empire and colonization and all of those kind of things. So I think it's kind of up to us as academics, as well as it is up to teachers at schools and us as parents to make sure that we have these conversations and these teachings at all times. And that's exactly why I brought her in here, because that's what I try and do with my kids as much as I can. So I think there's a big role for us to play, because it's not going to come from central government, at least in the UK, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, and I would say the same thing. I mean, obviously, we're having the same kind of, you know, Gloria, you know this as well as anybody, but we're having that same kind of official pressure and sort of academic conflict with external pressures to have us teach the entirety of the past, but in particular Black history in a very specific way in this country. And if anything, that is a story of resistance that, you know, that academics will have to engage in. I agree with Germaine that for me and Doug's question, the real issue is not having these conversations sequestered in a month, right? I mean, the sort of DNA of this conversation or of this effort is for us to, you know, is one, to connect the Black History Month experience discussions that populate October and February, but to make sure that, you know, and, you know, this is really important. I mean, you know, as with Germaine, my kids are really engaged in this stuff, and it just makes me realize, or in these conversations and in the protests, and it just makes me sort of realize that these the only way this we foster the conversation, have anything come from the conversation, is to actually keep the conversation going constantly, and not just have it be a specialized conversation. And then, you know, there's broader issues of intersectionality and the need to cross our different experiences and link them. But and also, you know, as Gloria mentioned, the intergenerational conversation is probably as key in that experience as anything else. I mean, my kids are tired of hearing the old man talk about the past, but I keep on telling them they need to know it. So, Cynthia, I know I want you to be able to weigh in as well.
Well, you know, ever since I just think a really powerful thing that any educational system can do is begin with, rewriting the history textbooks for K through 12. Too many kids come out of, I know in the United States, what goes in history textbooks is dictated by a Texas textbook consortium, which is invested in keeping the history the way it is, only talking about a few white men. No white women, maybe one, no Indians, no one. So, I mean, so young people need to have the facts so that they know what the truth is. And then you don't have 30-year-olds, 20-year-olds saying, well, that's not true, that's not my experience. When they don't know how we were built, how we come to live the way we live. You know, to me, this is like the most important thing I can think of.
And I think if I can add something to what you just said, I often use the word gatekeepers of knowledge. I use that word all the time, that phrase, because I think there are a lot of gatekeepers out there, and we're going to have to really sort of take a second look at those gatekeepers. And you mentioned one group, to be sure. Now, I've looked at publishing houses. I've looked at who was considered a scholar, what's considered credible research, who the informers are of knowledge, who controls actually what's being taught. And that only came to my attention recently in the United States. It really hit me hard when I hear these arguments that are going on right now about whether or not, you know, certain pieces of Black history should be taken out as if it didn't exist. And as if we don't already have so much missing until it's unbelievable. And so when I hear that, I thought, oh, no, we've got, now is the time to really speak up. The other thing that I would like to see related to this whole thing, I mentioned over and over again that we live parallel lives, okay? Black people, we are in this world, but there are other people in the world at the same time and often in the same place, experiencing life differently. And so sometimes those different experiences are hidden. They're hidden. And I can give you one real good example. I have she's a good friend of mine who happens to be white. And when I had told her about, spending the summers with my grandparents in Holly Grove, Arkansas, she was elated. Oh my goodness, here's somebody else. I know that I used to live there. That's where I'm from. In my head, I'm thinking I never even knew any white people lived in Holly Grove, Arkansas. I didn't. I never saw you guys because I was over here where all the black people are. And we only got to come into town on Saturdays. That was like our market day to come in and shop. And so I never knew. So her mind immediately went to the wonderful memories that she had. Her wonderful memories were different than my wonderful memories. But we never really crossed those two together. They were parallel lives being lived at the same time, but very different. But we never, those lives never get brought together. And we as Black people, this has been my finding, when I find myself in situations where I'm always expected to be the person who talks about these experiences. Now, I want all of us to come in here and hear this. I want to hear all sides of it. So anyway, that's sort of where I stand on that.
Well, continuing with that theme about education in particular, and about the pedagogy that is anti-racist. Two questions, both from colleagues at Basketball University. One, the first one, and I'll ask both of them, but I can always repeat them, but they're at least thematically linked. Teresa Ward asks, first says, "Thank you, Gloria, for sharing your story, which was extremely moving and shocking. You're extremely courageous and strong." She wanted to ask, was your university experience a positive one, or did you have to continue as an independent learner? So, and let's bring that through to graduate school, since I'm at CGU right now.
I have to. Yes. I think it was different in many ways. So let me skip to Claremont, because that's my most recent alma mater, and that was back in 1996. So I'm really dating myself now. But that was when I was working on my doctorate there. I always speak of my professors when I was at Claremont, because all of them had an impact on me. So I'm going to talk about another one. I talk about Dr. Antonia Darda, who was a professor of mine. And I took several courses with her. And it was in Antonia's class that we had the most Black people all the time. We loved being in her class. But the last one she had that I took with her was called Biculturalism. Now, why did I love that class so much? Because I felt free in that class. I was free to say whatever I needed to say, and the word race was not forbidden. I could say it. I could talk about my bicultural existence. I could talk about, and I used to talk about it all the time, how I was one way when I was on that campus in Claremont, and I was another way when I left. I said, you see one me here, and my family sees another me. I live, and I'm constantly having to maneuver my way back and forth. And I'm not just talking about the fact that I'm a student here and I'm a mother at home. No, I'm talking purely racially reasons why I have to be a certain different kind of way. And I have to watch what I say and how I say it. I have to watch what I write and how I write it. I have to write it so that it meets your guidelines for sure. And I have to read the professors that you thought were the best ones to read, who are the most knowledgeable. And I used to say out loud all the time, some of these people that did this research that we're talking about here that's considered just the best in the field, never were even around a person like me. And they generalize this stuff all the way through me. And if I don't pick it up and accept it, it's like something is wrong with me. So yes, I love that part of it. Now, when I was in nursing school, nursing is, is a professional school. And so you would think there, it was only professional, how to be a nurse, what to do. It was when I took care of my parents. I took care of my mom and my father in their last days. Did I realize how little I had learned about taking care of a Black person in nursing school? I didn't realize what I didn't know. I didn't know when my mother started getting what we would call pallor. I didn't even know what that looked like. I just knew something was changing in her skin. when I think about, I mean, there are many things that I didn't know. I could write a textbook about that now. And in fact, I became a real activist at that point, talking about things that the nursing program needs to start teaching, because they don't. I said, we know all the white normals. Oh, I can just knock them out for you. I know all of them to this very day, but I didn't know any of the black normals. So when you ask me, did it continue all the way through my education? Yes, it did. Differently, but it did. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Gloria. So a follow-up question, or at least slightly similar in theme, at least, from Richard Stamp, colleague, literature professor at Bath-Spa University. First, a very powerful and inspiring talk, and he thanks you for it. He, as a teacher of literature, he says he felt very keenly your point about the teacher's responsibility to recognize their own ignorance and to learn about the culture and background of their students. Have you got any advice for those of us who teach and design courses to keep them open to different experiences and knowledge that our students can bring to a university?
Richard, what a good question. Hello. There's one little simple thing that I always ask people who are teachers, and I ask them, do you ever talk to your students? If you have black students in your class, how much do you really ever talk to them? Now, I'm asking that question now because I want you to ask yourself that question. And I'm going to give you just a quick little thing from my own personal experience. I remember I was teaching a course in cultural diversity, back when cultural diversity was an early thing, and they sort of got any professor that they could find who happened to be a person of color almost to teach that, you know. So there I was, okay, teaching this thing, and it was a very good. My students were from all different backgrounds, from all over the world. A lot of immigrants were in the class, but I remember I had one gentleman in the class who was so quiet. He never said a word. He never said a word in that class whatsoever. He would write his paper, you know. Now, you know, you talk of, he'd lose points for not talking. You got to have class participation. One day I asked him to stay after class. Let me talk to you about this. I wanted to know what was going on. You know, you don't say anything. It was the best conversation I think I've ever had in my life. He sat there and he told me about, you know, the things that we were teaching and talking about. He told me about his experiences. He even told me about scholars that I didn't even know about that were from his culture. It was the best conversation I had in my life. And I think after that, I started talking to my students, as opposed to only talking to the ones that I felt comfortable in talking to. You know, sometimes we don't feel comfortable in talking to those students who seem to bring ideas forward that seem to be so removed from what we're talking about. And I think as scholars and as professors particularly, we've almost been programmed to be that way. You know, we have our curriculums and we have our syllabus. We have those things that we're going to follow straight down the line. And quite often we find that takes us away from just listening. Richard, I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, this is the struggles of the webinar format is we don't get the cues. I'll nod for Richard.
Good.
Yeah. Yes, he did. He says it was very helpful. Thank you. So there are a couple more observations that have come down, and I've copied them, and Gloria will receive them. I haven't seen any new questions that come down the pike. And I'm sort of formulating a question that I want to ask you, but I'm not sure how to ask it. But it is something that you know, has come up quite a bit recently, you know, in relation to the conversations about George Floyd and the discussions about the way in which Black parents have to talk to their children today, and the set of rules and the sets of behaviors that govern, you know, the different experiences that people have literally walking down the street. And, you know, and it struck me, you know, and you know, knowing what I've learned about the segregated South, you know, but knowing that, as you pointed out, and you were very clear, and I understand why you're very clear to point out that the rules of segregation in the Jim Crow South were never codified. They were about control. They were, and it was really important to educate the child, as your mother did, about literally walking down the street and about how to walk down the street. And so what are your conversations when you think about that today? I mean, what, you know, having now had this bridge experience between, you know, one of the great symbols of desegregation and of the segregated South is Little Rock Central High experience, and then the present day. I mean, you know, what is it? You know, is it shaking your head and saying nothing, it really is the same? Or
I think it's bigger. I think it's bigger. Sometimes, you know, we talk about the segregated South, and that was one of the more obvious uh, places. It was more obvious there. We knew what it was, and I really thought, to be perfectly honest, that when I left the segregated South, that I would see something very different. That was just a part of the South. That's what I thought. But what I found was I found what I call what I call naivety when I left the South, because things that I immediately reacted to, other people may not react to them quite so quickly. Things that scared me to death would not scare them quite as quickly. And so I think that there are some things that are the same, but they're said differently. And let me just name just a few of them in the short period of time that I know we have. I think there are issues right now. There was a situation here in Southern California. There was a young Black woman whose child was being bullied in the classroom. I remember that so well. It was just a news clip about it. But I wanted to reach out to her and say, oh, I know what you're feeling now. And she had literally gotten so angry about this. She came to the classroom and she was yelling and she was telling those other students what they better not do to her child and what she would do. And of course, there was a big thing behind that, because how dare you come in here and do this? But I knew what the woman was feeling, because I thought my parents, to tell you the truth, if they had known everything that I was going through in that bullying realm, they would have done the same thing. That's why I never told them. I never told them. I never said what my life was really like. In fact, it was after my parents passed away that I really started talking about it, because I just never wanted them to know what life was really like. And so I think that a lot of that is going on today. I think that a lot of our children today are placed in positions where they're being bullied. I think there are situations today where we have, I call it unjust punishment, and I'm talking children now, unjust punishments in schools where there's a way where white kids can sometimes get away with things that Black kids cannot get away with. Not only cannot get away with, quite often can be criminalized. I mean, it can be really bad. There is a pressure for us as parents, even as quote unquote educated parents. I always say my education gets in my way. I talk about that a lot. As educated parents, there's certain ways that we know we better behave, that we better say, we better talk. So we become the mouthpieces almost, because we better know how to, you better know how to go in here and you got to talk to this person. You got to be able to talk a certain way, look a certain way, dress a certain way. And that is more pressure on you as a Black person than it is on a white person. Now, I like to throw these things out very candidly. I like to throw it out just candidly off the top of my head. So if there are people who can say, no, Gloria, that's not really true, I mean, that's fine, because that might be their experience. But one of the things that I find myself teaching my children, we call it the wake-up call. And I tell them, I don't want you to be, when the wake-up call comes, I don't want it to be something that you haven't heard before. So sometimes I'll tell them just to protect them so that they're not shocked when it happens. I don't want them to become just so shocked about things. And that guides a lot of what I teach. And my children are grown people now. I have grandkids. And so now I'm watching the next generation teach the next generation. And what's most painful about that is to watch the need for that. Watch the need for that next generation to have to keep teaching the next generation, teaching the next generation. That hurts me deeply, deeply. I may have mentioned that my daughter was the second generation Black student to graduate from Little Rock Central High School, and she also graduated from Claremont. She also came right. She's my follower, I call her. So she also graduated from Claremont. And when she did her dissertation, she went back and she looked deeply, deeply into the histories in Arkansas particularly. And she was almost in tears, Why was she in tears? Not because it was something that happened so far back in the past, but because she could relate to too much of it in the present. Because she was having to say the same things now to her son that I had said to her brothers, or that my father had said to my brothers, and his father before him, and his father before him.
Well, we are almost out of time, practically out of time. But one question just came through that I'd be remiss actually to not ask, given exactly what you just said. And this is from Melanie Lindsay here at CGU. Again, thanking you, wanting to make sure that your story in this event is going to be archived and saved. It's being recorded. We will process it and have it presented and saved. But her question to you in particular was, literally, how do you practice self-care? How do you process the trauma, sadness, and anger?
Oh, wow. And I'm glad you're asking that question, Melanie. That's a very good question. And I didn't talk, I had actually written some notes about that when I was talking about my life at Central High School and sort of what we did. Because one of the things that Mrs. Daisy Bates, you've read about her story is very well known. I would love her all of my life. She passed away several years ago because she seemed to have just sort of known that we were teenagers back then and that we needed to have something social going on in our lives because we definitely weren't going to get it at school. And so she made sure that we got to go to everything that was going on outside of school. I spent a lot of time at Philander Smith College. I was talking to Sandra Johnson. She told me she went to what was AM&N in Pine Bluff, Arkansas at the time. We all went to things. We all went to social events. We went to camp. We did a lot of things. Now, carrying that forward from there to now, oh, trust me, I'm an expert at finding things to do that just make me feel happy. I'm really good with that. That's why I think I love traveling. I just love everything. And so, yeah, I'm constantly finding things to do because if I didn't, I think I would be insane. I'm really serious about that, and I feel sorry sometimes because there are people who don't have that, who don't have those outlets, who can't do that. I can understand that as well, but I have to do it. Sometimes I just have to get away to myself. I just have to be away from it all. Just shut it all out. So yeah, that's really self-care to me is really important. So I like everything. You name it. Yes.
Well, what a great last line to end our conversation with. And just for the record, Melanie is a PhD candidate in cultural studies here at CGU.
Good.
So I can say we've gotten to the end of our time together, though I will tell you very few people have dropped off. I'm sure the conversation can continue for the rest of the day, but I don't want to do that to you, Gloria. It's been a wonderful conversation, mind expanding. I will remember it. I'm sure we all will remember it. I just posted on the chat the web address for gala.net. I'm hoping that all of the combined activities, all the combined commemorative events and discussions and talks that Germain is organizing, that we're organizing at SUNY Geneseo and at CGU between now and February will be presented and announced there. Anyone can feel free. I can even put my email in. I will put my email in the chat as well. Anyone can reach out to me to make sure that you're informed about what's happening. I'm typing and talking at the same time, and I didn't fall over. So with that, Gloria, I want to thank you again from all of us for the opportunity to hear you speak.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jermaine, Cynthia. Thank you all
very much. Thank you.
All right. Well, I believe those in the UK have earned their dinner. Well, and I'm going to use the American language. You've earned your dinner. Cynthia and the people in New York have earned their late afternoon snack, their tea, and we've earned our lunch or the opportunity to go to our next meeting. So, Gloria, thank you again. It's deeply appreciated.
Thank you, Josh. Much
Yeah.
appreciated.
Bye.
Okay, goodbye,
Bye-bye.
everybody. Bye-bye.